In 1983, Calvin Johnson was sentenced to life in prison for crimes he did not commit. With the help of the Innocence Project, he was exonerated through state-of-the-art DNA testing. And in 1999, 16 years later, he walked out of jail a free man. His is a story of persistence and courage, strong faith and family support, and ultimately forgiveness. Today, Mr. Johnson is a member of the board of directors of the National Innocence Project in New York and chairman of the board of the Georgia Innocence Project. He's here to share the unforgettable story of his unrelenting quest for justice against incredible odds. Please join me in welcoming Calvin Johnson.
Anger is not a trait I was born with. It began in prison, and it grows each day. After 10 years, my anger has started to assert itself. For most of my life, I took pride in being easygoing, slow to react, and naturally calm, but I have changed. I have become insociable and quick to argue, but who wouldn't? I wake up each morning to the prison bars, to the company of men that I would not choose as friends. My time and my life are totally controlled and hopeless. As soon as I open my eyes, I am mad. The gnawing in my stomach now accompanies the dawn of each new day. I am so angry that complete madness cannot be far away. Bitterness is a drug, an addictive substance. It haunts me each minute, whispering its catechisms of complaints. As much as I try, I cannot calm the increasing volume of these voices. I cannot reason my way out because my anger is so reasonably constructed. I am innocent. I've been railroaded, and no one will help me. I have followed all the rules, been patient in my appeals for help, and nothing. My case for hatred is airtight. And the facts arrange themselves in my mind without effort. It is consuming me, and I am losing myself. Up until now, I have contained the rage beneath the thin shell of control. But now, the surface has cracked. That's the excerpt from Exit to Freedom. Good evening. My name is Calvin C. Johnson, Jr. I spent 16 years in prison in the state of Georgia for a crime I didn't commit. Tonight, I'm going to share my story with you. It's a true story, and it all began back in 1983. I remember that day just like it was yesterday. Beautiful day outside. It was a spring day. A lot like today, but a little bit warmer. But it was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful spring day. And it was a day when I was coming home from work. Went to work, went to the gym, worked out. Back then, I was a young, strapping young guy. I had the muscles and everything. And I'm walking down the street coming home. Actually, I rode the train, the bus system on the way home. And as I'm walking down the street, I remember approaching an area. It was a wooded area. And I felt a strange premonition that day. Something just didn't feel right. I actually hesitated to walk past that area. And at that same time, my mother actually drove down the street in her car. And like a little kid, I ran, I jumped in the car. I didn't tell her what I was feeling that day. Got in the car, we rode home, went into the house. And about 5 minutes after I was in the house, there was a knock. Doom, 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 doom. The weight of the state was knocking on the door. They opened the door, came into the house, put handcuffs on my wrists, and arrested me. Took me to a cold, dark, damp cell and threw me in there. I was scared. I was frustrated. I was angry. I was trying to figure out what was going on. Finally, somebody told me, said, hey, you've been arrested and you're being charged with rape. I said, rape? I didn't commit any rape. They said, well, you're being charged with more than just one. You're being charged with 2 rapes. One in Clayton County, Georgia, and one in Fulton County, Georgia. And these counties are counties that are side by side, neighboring counties. And they arrested me and charged me with both crimes. So that next day, I spent the night in that cell. The next day, my family had got together. They got a lawyer and everything. And they took me before what they call a live lineup. Now, most of you are probably familiar with a live lineup. It's a situation where they have a group of men, they stand behind a two-way glass, and somebody views you, and they decide if they could pick out the person that committed the crime. So I'm there. I'm standing up there with about six other guys, and 7 all told, including myself. And most of the guys had been in prison during the time when the crime happened. We're all standing there. And there's several people that come in, and they look, and they decide to pick out. And you don't really know if you're being picked out or not until later on. And afterwards, my attorney came up to me and said, well, the person that said you actually she actually picked out another individual. I said, what? I said, they picked out somebody else. And, of course, back then, I'm believing in the American justice system. I was brought up here in this fine country. I believe in the system. I'm saying to myself, any minute, they're going to realize that they made a mistake. They're going to realize that they made a mistake, and they're going to let me go. So when he told me that, I got extremely excited. I said, what? You mean I'm going home now? And I was just extremely excited. But no, he didn't let me go right then and there. He said, well, there was another lady in there for another case, and apparently she did pick you out, but it sounded kind of shaky how it was done. But anyway, they said that she picked me out, but the person there that they're going to take me to trial for didn't pick me out. She actually signed an affidavit to that effect, saying that she picked out someone else. So I said, okay, well, what's next? What do we have to do next? He said, well, we're going to have to go to a preliminary hearing. And during a preliminary hearing, it's kind of like a mini trial. It's where they go, and the judge he can just throw out the case right there if he feels like it's not enough evidence to try to bound it over. Or he can decide if he wants to take this case and he wants to take it before the grand jury, and they can make a decision whether or not to indict it. And if it's indicted, then I end up going to trial. So we went to this preliminary hearing. And during the preliminary hearing, it's very interesting because, like I said, it's like a mini trial. And a lot of facts are brought out. And this is my first time actually getting to see, the person that actually accused me of this crime. It was a crime, a rape, a horrible, horrible crime. The person who accused me of it, and what she had to say. So I'm sitting in there, my lawyer and I, and she comes in. And first thing my lawyer does, he questions her on her eyewitness, how she identified me in the first place. He said, well, how did you identify Mr. Johnson in the first place? And she said, by a photograph. He said, a photograph? He said, well, can you tell me a little bit more about the photograph? What kind of photograph did you identify Mr. Johnson from? Were they color pictures? Were they black and white? Just what type of photographs did you identify Mr. Johnson from? And she said, well, I think they were color. That was her answer. Then he also went on to question her about facial hair. In the police reports, it showed that she gave no description of facial hair. Well, I've had a mustache ever since I was about 16 years old. I've always had a mustache. And at the time that the crime took place, not only did I have a mustache, but I was wearing a full beard. Not a couple of day old rough-looking beard, but a full beard all the way around my face. And that's what I was wearing. She gave no description of a full beard. So he questioned her. He said, well, can you describe the attacker? And she said nothing about facial hair, nothing about mustaches, nothing about full beards, nothing of that nature. Later on, we had, they showed my employee ID picture. And later on, also, my employer also testified. And I had friends, I had other people testify of the fact that I had a full beard at the time that the crime took place. Did it make any difference at that time? Apparently not. And so it went on, and we asked the lady a few more questions, and then they took the police and brought the police to the stand. And once the police officer got to the stand and said, well, officer, can you show us the pictures that Mr. Johnson was originally identified from? And do you have them with you today? And he said, yes, sir. And he pulled out a series of pictures, and they were a series of small black and white pictures. I'm sitting there shaking my head. I'm saying, I can't believe this. I said, I know the judge is going to throw this out. I said, she said she thought the pictures may have been color. Now they got a series of small black and white photographs that the police are showing. I said, there's contradictory statements being made here. What's going on? But it went on and it went on and it went on. And they brought out other facts. They said, well, we're going to have to go and take blood samples and hair samples. But, of course, at that time, everything was too early to have any results. They're just saying, these are the things that we need to do before we can make a decision. Well, the judge went ahead and he sent it to the grand jury. Despite all the things that were pointing toward my innocence, the fact that I even had alibi testimony, and so forth. And they sent it to the grand jury, and the grand jury indicted me. During that time, I was being held in the jail. And time was going by, and I was being held in the jail. One day, they come to get me. And they're going to take me, and they're going to decide they're going to take blood samples from me and hair samples. And they shackle me down, they shackle my wrists, they shackle my ankles and everything. And they take me off to the local hospital. Get me to the local hospital, and they strip me completely down. I remember it was very humiliating because they stripped me down, and it was like a joke to them. They had the door wide open. Anybody could walk by. And they started plucking hair samples from my body. They plucked hair samples from my mustache, from my chest, from wherever they wanted to, my private areas. They just plucked hair samples, just pluck, 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 pluck. Very, very humiliating. And they took blood samples. And they were going to take these to compare from what happened at the scene of the crime. Of course, whenever there's a rape, they take, they have semen, they have hairs that are left behind, and they're going to compare, they can get the blood samples from the semen and so forth. So later on, the samples come back, and my lawyer comes up to me. He says, well, I got decent news and I got good news. I said, well, tell me the decent news and then tell me the good news. He said, well, the decent news is that the blood sample came back, a person that committed the crime is O positive. Okay? How many people in here are O positive? How many people know the blood type? Raise your hand. Okay, well, over 40% of the population is O positive. Now, all you people that just had your hand raised, you're guilty. That's what they told me. I'm O positive. They said, well, you're O positive. You must be the guy. I'm like, hey, O positive, that's 40% of the population. But the hair samples came back. And the hair samples showed that a person of African-American ancestry committed the crime. But the hair samples did not match Calvin C. Johnson, Jr. They didn't match me. What did I do? I said, oh, I'm going home now. I got excited. I mean, I really got excited. I just knew they were going to just, see that they made a mistake. I never believed that I would spend one day in jail for the charges brought against me. I just knew that somewhere along the line that they would realize that they made a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake. Well, for some reason, that didn't happen right away. I come to find out that the district attorney himself, the head district attorney, decided that he wanted to take the case on and he wanted to try the trial. And I'll never forget the day on the jury selection. As we selected the jury, and there's supposed to be a jury of your peers, Clayton County at the time, and I think this is important for me to bring it up, but Clayton County, Georgia, at that particular time, was a predominantly white county. So in my jury selection, the victim of the crime was white. Though my jury selection, they had 2 African-American people that could be selected to be on my jury out of all the people that were there. Of course, they got struck, so I ended up with an all-white jury. Not to say that, that this is a racial type thing, but just think about it. If it had been a Mexican victim and an all-Mexican jury, a black victim, all-black jury, Asian, all-Asian jury, what do you think the results would be? Well, I ended up with an all-white jury. And I can remember that the day that, as we were selecting, I remember how the people were looking at me. They were looking at me like with disgust. And it was a normal reaction because I had been accused of some horrendous crimes. And they looked at me and they're like, ugh, like I was some type of animal. And it was almost like they had convicted me already in their mind. And it's the same thing that we do every single day. We're all guilty of it. And my wife did it just the other day. And I reminded her because it's funny because I thought of all people, she should know better. But you sit there, you watch the news, you see in your area or in the neighborhood where you live in, murderer caught, rapist caught, child molester arrested. And the first thing you think, wow, I'm glad they got that guy. You know, I hope they put him away for life. You know, natural reaction. And we have already in our mind had convicted that person. And it's not you're innocent until proven guilty anymore. Now you're actually guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And as I said, my wife actually did that just the other day. It couldn't have been no more than about 2 days ago. We're watching the news, and it was sad because a 10-year-old child had been raped. And they arrested a guy, and she was looking at the news, and she said, I'm glad they got that son of a, you know. I said, hold up, honey. You don't even know if he's guilty or not. But, you know, we don't know. We don't know. If he is guilty, then he should do prison time, and probably maybe he should never get out again. I can't say. But that's if he's guilty. But as we went on, we went to trial. And during the course of the trial, a lot of the facts that during the preliminary hearing were brought back out in more detail. The trial was set up where, of course, we attacked the identification procedures. We attacked it very, very hard because we said, well, during the photographic lineup, she stated that she thought that the pictures may have been color. Well, actually, what the police showed were black and white. We attacked the description of hair. You know, how come you didn't give any description of hair? So now during the trial, she started to say, well, it may have been a light beard or it may have been stubble, which is something that she never stated before. Then later on, as we go on, other facts are brought out, and I have my employer. He comes, he testifies, he gets on the stand. He says Mr. Johnson had a full beard. I have my family, they testify. My girlfriend at the time, fiance, she testifies that Mr. Johnson had a full beard. None of it makes any difference. We go on, they bring out the fact that they asked about the blood samples. The DA, he said, well, he's O positive. The person that committed the crime is O positive. He's guilty. And then my lawyer, he comes back and he brings out the fact that, okay, what about the hair samples? Well, the hair samples belong to a person of African ancestry, but they don't match my client. They don't match Calvin C. Johnson, Jr. And you know, the worst thing about the court procedures is they always had that moment where they ask the victim, and you know you're sitting there, and they know who's in the courtroom. Can you identify the person that attacked you that night? Is he in the courtroom that day? And of course, they always turn around with a tear in their eye and they say, he did it. Well, that's emotional, and it has an emotional effect on the jury, a very powerful emotional effect. But you say, well, he's the only one in here that's sitting there at the table besides his attorney. Who else could she point at? I'm the only one in there that she could actually point at. So that's something else you have to think about. Something else the prosecution team did that it really hurt me to my heart and it shocked me was they brought in witnesses that I've never seen before that I knew nothing about. They called it similar transaction. They said there were similar crimes committed in the same area. But there weren't really crimes. They were just accusations. Some lady, she got up there and she testified and she said, well, earlier that night, the same night of the rape, somebody knocked at my door and said that they were Jim or something. And I didn't know who he was, so I wouldn't let him in. Then later on, I saw him trying to peep in my window. And then she said, that's him right there. But no crime was ever charged. Nobody was ever charged with that crime. Another lady said that she was actually in her shower. And she came out the shower, and there was a man standing in her house, in her living room. And she ran out the back door to get help. And said that she remembered later on that she had saw that same guy at the little store, at some little store or something where she works at earlier that evening. No crime, nobody's charged with anything, but she said, this is the guy. That's the guy. I had never seen these people before in my life. And I'm sitting there and I'm wondering, you know, what's going on? I mean, you have thoughts. You have all kinds of thoughts. You say, well, maybe the victim is just, you know, distraught. Maybe she's, you know, just making a mistake. And then you think other thoughts. Well, you know, maybe she's trying to make a deal with the police. Maybe she's wanted for something, or maybe she has a friend that she's trying to get off. You don't know what's going on. I felt like it was like a chess game, and I felt like a little pawn that had no control over my movement, and like they were just pushing me around with no care or no feelings for me as a human being. All they wanted was to just close the books, to get us victory, to satisfy their ego, to say, I got a conviction in this case. Well, after all these facts were brought out, and the majority of the facts we felt were in my favor because my parents, they testified the fact that at the time the crime was committed, I was actually at home. I had alibi testimony. My mother had not been feeling well, so I was staying at her house at the time. My dad used to take me to work in the morning, so I'm there at the house. My mother's sitting in the living room. She falls asleep on the couch. She wakes up. She's up and down all night long, watching TV and so forth. 4 or 5 in the morning, I get up. My dad gets up. He takes me to work. We got a dog in the house that makes a bunch of noise. It's going to bark if anybody goes in and out the house, including me. All this was brought out. And my mother, she's not the type of person where she's going to make up something and just to protect her son. She's not that type of mom. But alibi testimony meant absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. After all this went forth, the jury went out. They deliberated. They came back. They found me guilty. They deliberated approximately 45 minutes, maybe an hour at the longest. Long enough to go out and make a phone call and say, hey, I'll be home for dinner. Came back and found me guilty. Sentencing was a week later. When I went before the judge sentenced me to natural life in the Georgia penitentiary. It means I did have an opportunity to parole, but if I didn't ever make parole, I would spend my natural life in prison. I was young then. I was strong. So they sent me down south to the worst penitentiary in the state of Georgia, to the hardest working camp in the state of Georgia. I can remember those days. It was like a nightmare. I just had to pray just to make it through the day. You get up in the morning, it was almost like being on a big plantation or something. You're sitting in the cafeteria, and the warden, he's standing up over you. He's looking like as if to say, feed my boys good. Because they want a good day's work out of you. You go out before the sun is even up. You're out, going out to go to work. We did everything from swinging bush axes, which is a long, like stick with a blade on the end, cutting bushes and swamp water, snakes, moccasins, rattlesnakes, you name it, on a daily basis, digging up tree stumps, all these things. And I can remember the first time and one day we was out there, and I seen snakes before on National Geographic, so I wasn't that worried. I wasn't that afraid of the snakes. I mean, I was cautious of them, but I wasn't afraid. But one day this thing ran across me, said, ew. I said, oh, man, what's that? He said, man, that's an armadillo. I had never seen an armadillo in my life. It looked like a big rat with an army helmet on it or something running across there. I almost got shot by the guard. I said, an armadillo, So every day it was something. And you had to pray. You had to pray. But after about a year of being there, I actually had the opportunity to go to trial for the other charge. They actually charged me with 2 rapes. And one was in Clayton County, the other one was Fulton County. And when I went to trial for the one in Fulton County, they asked me before I went there, they said, well, Fulton County really doesn't want to try you. So you have a choice. You have a choice of if you want to go to trial or not. I said, well, is it going to help? I said, if I could prove myself innocent, would that help me get out as far as in Clayton County? And they said, well, it's possible. It's possible that could have some effect. And maybe it might help you get out in Clayton County. So I said, well, anything that helped. Then they tried to scare me up. They said, well, you're just going to get more time. You've already been convicted of one. You're going to find you guilty, and they're going to give you another life sentence, and you're going to never get out. You're going to die in prison. But I was like this. I said, it doesn't make any difference. Hey, I'm innocent. I didn't do it. Whatever I need to do to try to prove my innocence, let's do it. And so we asked them. We said, we want to go to trial in Fulton County. Because Fulton County was a neighboring county of Clayton County. Even though the crimes took place within blocks of each other, there were 2 separate counties. And in Fulton County was a diverse county. So we got a jury makeup of 7 blacks and 5 whites. The trial took place. I took the stand. You know how hard it is to get a not guilty verdict, period. But if you put your character on the stand and you testify for yourself, then they can bring up the fact that you already been convicted of the same thing. And that makes it even doubly hard. Well, I'm not like some people say, well, I'm just going to let my lawyer do all the talking. I wanted to speak up. I wanted to talk for myself. So I took the stand, and I spoke up for myself. Oh, and they brought up all this dirt. Oh, he's already convicted. He's already been charged with this in Clayton County and so forth. And so the young lady, she came, and she did the same thing. Can you identify this man? And she points and said, that's him. And all this goes through, and they go through the hair about the hair and the hair samples and the blood and everything. And all this goes on, and it's just like a copycat trial of the previous trial. So I'm not going to go into all the details. But the jury goes out, and they go out and they stay out about a day. And they come back, and they find me not guilty in Fulton County, Georgia, 1 year later. The victim father walked over to my family, and I heard him when he said it because my father was standing right there. He said, I just want to apologize to you because I don't know what's going on, but I just hope that your son, everything works out and he gets out of jail. He wouldn't say anything else other than that. Of course, I'm thinking, I'm getting excited again. I'm thinking, well, okay, Fulton County, I've been proved innocent here. Clayton County got to let me go. But it doesn't work like that. Those are two separate counties. And now I still have to work to try to prove myself innocent in Clayton County. And as the years go by, when you're in prison, it affects everybody. It affects your family. Your family's in prison with you. They suffer. I had a very close-knit family, very close-knit to my mom. And it just literally broke her heart. I mean, she actually suffered strokes and heart attacks and had to have angioplastic and bypass surgery and a little bit of everything. And it was really, really, really hard and really, really rough on her. So during those years, of course, my appeal was filed on the state level, but it never really went any higher than the state level, which it was denied and turned down. But it never really went any higher because my family was started concentrating. I was in prison, so they started concentrating on my mother's health. And I understood that. So things got put off and things got delayed. As the years going by in prison, I'm doing prison time. I mean, I don't know if any of you, a lot of you probably see the prison movies, and some of it's exaggerated, but a lot of it's true. A lot of it's true. I mean, in prison you have where the strong prey upon the weak. And I tell the youngsters all the time, you go to prison, I say, hey, you just can't go up to a refrigerator, open up, and get you a hot dog or a piece of pizza that's left over when you want, because everything is regimented. Everything is controlled. You wear a prison uniform. They tell you when to go to bed. They tell you when to get up. They tell you to go to work. We had to go to work, tell you about when to go to work, when you can watch TV, if you can have a visit, what hours you can have visitation rights, if you can use a phone. I was at a prison one time where they let us use the phone for 5 minutes once a month. Later on, they actually got phones in the prison that you could use a little bit more regular than that. But this was in the beginning, and it was rough. It was rough. I was in the prison where I remember one night I was sleeping on the top bunk and the guy was sleeping on the bottom bunk. And in prison, you don't borrow things and don't pay people back. And a guy owed a debt. And because he owed a debt, I'm sleeping on the top bunk, he's sleeping on the bottom bunk. Some of the guys who he owed the debt to got together and paid another guy to hurt this guy. And I'm sleeping there, all of a sudden the bed starts shaking, and I'm looking down, he's being stabbed in the middle of the night. I used to go to bed, and people say, I actually should sleep. We have like Brogame boots that we wear in prison, like almost kind of like boots that people wear in the Army, only they're not the pretty brownish suede ones you see a lot of guys wearing. These are solid black boots. We used to sleep in our boots all the time because there's nothing unusual to hear screams throughout the night with things going on, people getting jumped on, people getting beat, people getting abused. These things actually happen in prison. So it was not what you call your normal everyday existence. And here I am. Little things used to bother me. I remember, walking by the television set and looking up at the TV because the TV's on. And you know how they have the family programs, and you look up and you see the nice family, and you see the wife, and you see the husband, and you see the child, and see the little dog wagging his tail, and they live in the American dream. And I used to just stop for a minute and just stare because it was like a pain shooting through my heart because I felt the pain because I'm saying, wow, that should be me. I should be living that American dream. But yet I felt like I was wasting away. Like I had all this potential to give. All this potential for society, something that I could give back to make a contribution. My hands are a little weak. I had a motorcycle accident about a month and a half ago. Pretty serious accident, but I'm here. That's a good thing. So it takes me a minute to grip. But that's not a midlife crisis, my motorcycle. I've been riding motorcycles off and on all my life. Y'all say, midlife crisis. What are you doing on a motorcycle? Now, actually, I've been riding them off and on ever since I was a kid. And so when I got out of prison, all the things I dreamed about in prison, I started doing. And then people say, you're just doing that because it gives you a sense of freedom. I say, well, you're darn right. Yeah. But prison is not a fun place. I mean, a lot of violence took place. A lot of emotions go through you. And those years, they were hard because a lot of frustration built up. I remember being frustrated. I remember being angry. I remember it just starting to get worse and worse and worse. And then what made it so bad was you go before the parole hearing to see if you're going to make parole. And, of course, they tell you to say, okay, Mr. Johnson, you're in here for a sex offense. You need to take SOP. I said, what's SOP? That's a sexual offender program. They said, you need to take a sexual offender program to help rehabilitate you, to prepare you to go back out into society. So here I am. I'm telling the parole board, hey, I'm innocent. I didn't commit the crime. So, of course, they're writing down their little notes. And they're saying, he's in denial. He's showing no remorse. He's not. He won't admit to his crime. We feel that he's still a threat to society, and so forth. And so, an innocent man is denied parole, and it's harder for an innocent man to get out of prison than somebody who's guilty, because if he's guilty, they can say, "Oh, he's sorry. He's showing some remorse. He's taking this program." And so, they wanted me to take this sexual offender program. In order to take this sexual offenders program, the first part is kind of like therapeutic, I guess. You just go in there, you sit down. And then the second part, you have to sign a admission of guilt and all these things. And so I remember discussing it with my family and everything, because I tell them I don't think I could do it. And my family, who just wanted me to get out of prison, were saying, well, why not go ahead and just do what they want you to do? Play the game, take the little class, sign the admission of guilt. Do whatever you have to do to get out. And I thought about it. I went to the counselor. We have prison counselors, and the counselor told me, he said, Mr. Johnson, if you don't take the sexual offender program, you might not ever get out of prison. He said, you might die in prison. She said, I'd never repeat that on record, but I'm just telling you to your face. That was a hard blow. So I had to think about it real hard. I really had to think about it. And I said, well, what kind of life would I have? What kind of life would I have coming out of prison with the stigma of being a rapist? Who would want me in the neighborhood? When I walk outside to the mailbox and the neighbor runs out and grabs the little child and runs back in the house. What kind of life is that? Who want to give me a job? Who want me working around other females? So I thought about it. I said, well, if that's the case, what kind of life is that? And I made the decision in my mind that I could not ever sign a piece of paper saying I did something I didn't do, and that I would rather die in prison than go out there in the world with the stigma of being a rapist. And even though I didn't hold any, even though I didn't hold any faith in the parole board as far as trying to grant me parole, I still had a little flicker of hope that some kind of way, through the courts or through some means, something would come up, and that I would be able to prove my innocence. I remember as the more years went by, and every year I went up for parole, they would set me off a little bit further. They set me off 1 year, and then they set me off 3 years, and they set me off 5 years, and it was like they were trying to break me. The prison is all about just really tearing down your dignity totally and just having total control over you. And I got to the point where I became like a walking time bomb. I felt like a rubber band. You know how you just stretch a rubber band to just says pow. I feel like any minute I might just pop. I might just snap. And little things start bothering me. Little things that didn't bother me start bothering me. And my temper became real short. And I knew I was right on the edge of being sane and insane. And I was right at that point. And it was that point where I did the only thing I knew I could do. I actually got down on my knees and I prayed. I just prayed because I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't carry the load. I couldn't carry the burden. It was just too much for me. And it changed my life. That prayer changed my life. And as the years went on, I heard about DNA. I remember reading, I said, wow, people are getting out on DNA. I said, what is DNA? DNA. They said, well, everybody's unique. Everybody has their own little unique DNA. And if they can locate the evidence, they can compare it, and they can see if you were actually a person that committed the crime or not. I said, whoa. So I'm thinking that, I'm getting all excited. And I'm telling people about DNA, and this is brand new. This is in the early 90s, and nobody knows about it. Nobody is educated about it. So I'm trying to build me a team to try to get some support to help me get the DNA test. But I'm thinking that, by me not knowing anything about DNA, I'm thinking, well, it may cost me, a couple $100,000 or something to have a DNA test. 'Cause I have no idea how much it costs. And this is what I'm thinking. I'm in prison. I'm thinking it's going to cost all this money. And I'm saying, I don't know where I'm going to get the money from, but I got to try to figure out how to have a DNA test. So I'm sitting there, I'm trying to figure it out. And we have what they call PLCP, Prisoner Legal Counseling Project. Okay, and these is legal aid. It's legal aid that's funded by the state of Georgia to help prisoners do simple things, nothing too hard. And so this guy comes in, his name is Jim Bonner. He's an attorney for him. And I make an appointment to see him. I bounce up in there and I tell him all about my situation and tell him I'm going to send him my transcript. And he's looking at me like I'm out my mind. But I send him my transcript. And he's riding in his car and he's reading it. And I asked me how he's riding and reading, but that's what he told me. Maybe he's reading it at the stops. But he actually said, he said, I'm riding along, I'm reading your transcript. Okay. And he read it. And he was shocked. He said, man, I can't believe this. He said, this is one of the most unjust miscarriages of justice I've ever witnessed in my life. He said, I'm not supposed to see it, but I'm going to try to help you. And he started helping me. And he filed an extraordinary motion for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence. And that means that now that they would have to give me a new trial if I can prove my innocence based on newly discovered evidence, because there's evidence that didn't exist back when I went to trial. DNA didn't exist back in 1983 when I went to trial. But now the new evidence does exist, and it's a possibility that it could prove that I was innocent. But nobody believed the evidence was still there. They said, well, after all these years, the evidence is probably destroyed. It's probably thrown away. Come to find out, the judge had retired, the clerk had retired, and the evidence, when they went searching for the evidence, they found it, but it was a miracle. The evidence had actually been tossed into a trash bin to be destroyed. And somebody from the court, from the district attorney's office, walked by, saw all this evidence in the trash bin, and called the district attorney's office and said, why do we have evidence in the trash bin? And he said, well, maybe you better take it back out and put it on the shelf. And that was my box. And he pulled it back out. I told him, put it on the shelf. And the evidence was still there. So we were able to, through that motion, they could not destroy it now because the motion had been filed. So they had to keep that evidence for testing. And then the strangest thing happened. This Prisoner Legal Counseling Project, guess what? The state defunded it. They stopped supporting it. And now, all of a sudden, it just goes out of existence. And there goes my support, the little bit of help I had. A couple of more years go by, and a childhood friend calls me, a young lady named Kim. Kim, you know how you have that childhood friend who's not your real sister, but she's just like family. She's just like a sister. And me and Kim grew up together, playing together, doing everything together, growing up as little kids. And she knew about my situation. And she wrote me. And one day, her mother were at it was one of those places that was kind of like a soup line where people come through and, you know, they're homeless and they're hungry and you feed them soup. And her mother my aunt, I call her Aunt Marty, she's very outspoken. And this young, strapping guy comes through, and she look at him and said, boy, you need to get you a job. What you doing in the soup line? And he explains to her that, he said, hey, I was in prison for something I didn't do, and now I'm trying to get my life back together. And, I need to come through this soup line. So she said, well, how did you get out? He told her about this project, the New York Innocence Project. And she said, well, I tell you what, young man, you go get me that information, the address, telephone number, bring it back to me, and I'll help you out. We'll give you some money, some clothes, or whatever. So he went and got it, brought it back. They kept it in part of the bargain, and she wrote me a letter. Kim wrote me a letter saying, hey, you need to contact these people, the New York Innocence Project. They're helping people get out of prison based on DNA evidence. And I'm like, whoa, wow. So I wrote the New York Innocence Project, and I wrote them, and I was so persistent, it was like I really was bugging them. They send you a official little form that says, okay, we'll be back in touch with you within 45 days. Then they send you a questionnaire to fill out. And all this time they're saying, wait while we do this, we do that. And I had my sister, I said, call them. Then I had my sister. Then one day they were sitting up in the office, and this is the truth. And I said, fax in the transcript. Find out in some kind of way she got the fax number. And they sitting up there in the office, and my transcript starts coming over on the fax. And you can imagine, they probably ran out of paper before it all got through there. But they were like freaking out. They said, well, this guy just won't let it stop. And so they took on my case. And once they took on my case, my hope just seemed to build up because, these were famous people. This was Barry Scheck, Peter Newfield, attorneys that helped out in some very, very, very large cases that were well known. And they had this Innocence Project, and they looked at my case, and they told me, they said, wow, you know what? Your case is truly unique. They said, we never had a case like this before. And they said, here we got a case where it's like taking two rats or something and putting one rat in this cage, one rat in that cage, and see how they react. And they said, wait, reason why we say this because here you are, you had two exact trials, one with an all-white jury, one with a mixed jury, but yet you had two totally different results. And they said this is something that we never had a case similar exactly like this before in the United States since the Innocence Project's been in place. And so it piqued their interest, and they took my case. A lot of things happened over the course of them taking my case with evidence being misplaced and so forth. Even again, it got misplaced again and went into a laboratory, and the laboratory shut down, and they had to move it to another laboratory. And then they did all this testing, and the testing came back, and it was inconclusive. Inconclusive. So then I get a phone call. You just can't get a direct call, but anyway, we get in touch. And I'm talking to the attorney. I'm actually talking to Barry Scheck. And he's telling me, he's saying, well, here's your options. He said, we got a situation. He said, all the evidence has just about been destroyed. He said, there's just a tiny pinprick of evidence left. He said, you can send it back. He said, you can send it back to the same laboratory that's been screwing it up all along. Let me screw it up again. Or you can wait till new technology comes forth, better technology that may be able to test it and get a result. Or you can send it out to a guy in California named Dr. Blake, named Dr. Edward Blake. He's supposed to be one of the best of the best. I talked to my family about it, and we decided to send it to Dr. Blake. Dr. Blake was able to take those samples, and he came back, and it showed that I don't get the odds right, but so many odds to a million, blah, 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 that it was impossible that Calvin C. Johnson, Jr. could have committed that crime. That was in November of 1998. In November of 1998, of course, my family got extremely excited. They thought for sure that I would be home for Christmas, but it didn't happen. And when I didn't get home for Christmas, my mother suffered her worst heart attack that she could have. She actually went into a coma during that January, February, and March of the next year. We didn't think she was going to make it. But I remember being in prison and praying, and I just felt in my heart that she was going to be okay. On June 15, 1999, I was exonerated of all charges and walked out of prison as a free man. The first place I went was to see my mom. She couldn't speak at the time, but she could recognize me, and she had come out of her coma at that time. They had a trachea in her throat, so she could barely, she really couldn't say anything. I remember walking into that room, and a tear running down her face. I knew it was a tear of joy after 16 years of not seeing her son, but holding on and believing and having faith that one day the truth would be brought out. My life changed. That was the beginning of a new life, thanks to the New York Innocence Project, thanks to volunteers, thanks to people that believe, the people that were willing to fight for the cause of justice just because it's what's right. And that's something powerful. When somebody you don't even know stands up on your side just because it's for a cause that is right. Very, 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 very powerful. I became very good friends with the people of the Innocence Project. I remember instead of them just, after the trial, just running off and leaving, Peter Newfield was down there, he actually came to the same place where my mother was at, and he visited her also, which was very, very touching and meant a lot to me. But my life, it just seemed like my life just after that, it just changed. The next day, I thought that it would be just like maybe a few cameras and so forth. It was cameras and media everywhere. I mean, the next day they came and they picked me up in a limousine and they took me, and here I am. I'm on national TV. I'm on Today Show. I'm on Good Morning America. I'm on CNN. I'm on Montel Williams. I'm on all these shows. I'm like, wow, So my dad, he's picking at me talking about, yeah, that's just your little 2 minutes of fame. It's going to die out. And everybody, and normally that's what happens. Normally that's what happens. It dies out, and then he said, well, what you going to do after that? He's just trying to prepare me. He's just trying to get me ready for when everything comes, back down to normal. And so he just don't want me to come crashing down. But things kept up. Things kept up. Even now today, I'm still involved in a lot of things. I'm still doing a lot of things. But the best thing about freedom is that it gave me an opportunity in life. It gave me an opportunity to go out there, get good employment. It gave me an opportunity to purchase a home. It gave me an opportunity to get married. I'm married now. I have a beautiful wife. I have a 7-year-old daughter. So you say he got out in 1999, 7 years. He didn't waste much time, did he? But that's my heart. My 7-year-old daughter is my heart. And it's just, I'm thrilled to be here in Boston to be able to share with you my story. And I'm going to open up the floor to questions and answers because I know that you may have a lot of questions. There's a lot of details. I could sit here and I could tell my story. I could talk for 2 hours, but that's a little long. So we're going to open up for questions and answers, and that'll give some time to answer whatever questions you have. Okay, she has a microphone.
After all these years, though, did they ever find out who did commit the crimes?
Okay, she said after all these years, did they ever find out who did commit the crimes? In my case, the answer to that question is no. The Clayton County, the county that I was involved in, they never pursued it. They didn't even look. And their explanation to me as to why they didn't look. And see, a lot of times we do have cases where sometimes we can, through the DNA, sometimes we can get a hit to somebody who we find out the person that did commit the crime, which really puts a strong influence on trying to get the right person. But they told me that they didn't know what the victim was. That's what they told me. That in this state of high technology, that they didn't know where she was, and they couldn't contact her, they couldn't locate her, and therefore, with no victim, there's no need to pursue a crime. That was the answer that was given to me. Now, I kind of just shook my head, but hey, the victim has never contacted me. I mean, if she did, I would be, pleasant to her. I hope that her life is well now. And I don't know if she purposely, said that he did it, or she knew what she was doing, or she was just, confused and frustrated or influenced by the police officers. So you can't really say, you can't wish bad on anybody, you can only wish them the best.
Did you ever get an apology from the district attorney? Did the state of Georgia ever compensate you for your loss?
He wants to get in my pocket. He wants to know if I got any money in my pocket. I got $1. Now, good question. Thank you, sir. He said, did the state of Georgia compensate me for my loss, and did I ever get an apology from the district attorney or from anybody from the state of Georgia? The district attorney never really gave me a direct apology. It was a very weak apology. He he kind of walked up to me at the end of the trial. I mean, after the end of the day, when they actually released me, when I went back to court for my exoneration, and he mumbled something like, I hope you're all right, something like that. But he never really, and everybody was like, all the cameras were like, oh, he's gonna jump up and choke him or something. But I was calm and everything. So nothing really official no more than they say stuff like, well, we wish you the best. At the time, we felt we did what was right, but we're glad that things worked out on your behalf now. Stuff like that. Not exactly just a direct apology. Some ironic situation happened. I actually moved back out to Clayton County. And I live in Clayton County right now. I've been living there for the last 7, 8 years. And I got called to jury duty. And the judge that had retired had came back and I actually went before this judge in the jury pool. Of course, they struck me, but he would never look me in the eye. And so later on, I was there all that week, and I got struck every time I got up. Everybody knew who I was. They kept striking me. So the end of the week, I was standing in the hallway talking to some people, and the judge walks by. And he can't walk right by me. Everybody's looking like, what is he going to do, And he walks by, and he finally walks up to me and said, well, Mr. Johnson, I'm glad that things are working out for you and wish you the best in life. And they never actually apologized. And he goes on by, and then everybody runs up to me. Hey, that's all he said. They were madder than I was. I wasn't even really mad. I expected it. I said, he could at least apologize. But as far as the state of Georgia, we're working trying to get compensation laws throughout the United States of America. The Innocence Project is really working hard on that. And it's an uphill battle. It's an uphill battle. But we have gotten some states that do have laws to compensate people. Georgia doesn't have a law exactly to compensate anybody. I did do what I was the first person in the state of Georgia to be exonerated on DNA evidence. So I kind of paved the way. When I got out, there was no such thing as a Georgia Innocence Project. It didn't come into effect until several years later, and I'm involved with that project now. So I had to kind of pave the way. And I filed a claim with the Claims Advisory Board, which means I had to get a state representative to represent me. They had to go before the Senate and the General Assembly and had to kind of get it passed like you pass a bill to say that we're going to agree to give Mr. Johnson so much money. And I did receive $500,000, which is not much, but I took it and ran with it because I didn't think that they wanted to give me even that at the time. So I took it, I ran with it. It did help me as far as getting my life back together in some areas, as far as purchasing homes and things like that I would have been hard for me to do. Because when you get out of prison, you're in a situation where it's not that you got bad credit, you just don't have any credit, And it's like that. It's like that, and so it's hard. It's a hard adjustment on a person that's just tossed out, after being locked up for years. And now he has no credit, no rental history. He can't, sign for anything. He's a grown man, but he has to get somebody to try to co-sign for him for things. And it can be very, 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 very difficult at times.
When you told the story, you said that you were put in a jail cell and didn't know what you were accused of. Did they read you your Miranda rights?
When they arrested me, they just came and they just snatched me up. I don't remember they read me Miranda rights or anything. I just remember they put the handcuffs on me so tight I still got some bruises. You can see the little scars on the side. And they may have said something like, you did this, you did that, but it was so confusing. It was just crazy. There was so much happening, and it wasn't until I actually, my family obtained an attorney, and he sat down and he kind of talked to me and told me, so this is what's going on, that I finally knew what was going on. And even, they come to you and they try to ask you questions. Maybe they merit some rights to me then, but they try to question me. I'm kind of like this, I'm like, hey, I'm not saying nothing. I don't know why I'm here. I'm not saying anything. Wait till I get an attorney and we'll deal with it then. So I just kept my mouth shut. I wouldn't even talk to them. They got mad about that.
Thanks. And the second question is, in this state we have a Corey report, which means that, once you're arrested, it's on your your record, I guess. And even if you're not found guilty, it's still there if you were arraigned. Do you have a record? I mean, now, or if you call up, would you have something next to your name, or have you been completely exonerated?
I've been exonerated of the rape charge that I was accused of. I did have, earlier in my life, I was kind of wild and crazy and did a lot of things I shouldn't have done. I did have a previous arrest record, but for the actual charges that I did the 16 years on, that's clear now. It is clear now.
That's good.
Yes. Okay, let her go. She's been having her hand up for a while.
I was wondering, did they ever find out if the two cases were actually related?
She said that they ever find out if the two cases were actually related. According to them, they just, in their mind, they had their mind made up that they just knew that the same, but it was so similar that they just said they just knew the same person committed both crimes. To this day, they still believe that, but, I mean, as far as actually proving it through DNA technology or anything like that, no, they don't have any proof, no more than just this is the way we feel, this is what we believe.
Sir, how can you feel no bitterness?
He asked me, how can I feel no bitterness? Okay. I could have talked about that for at least another 40 or 45 minutes. But I didn't, because we would have been here a long time. But the reason why I don't feel any bitterness is because of my religious beliefs. I am a Christian. And during my prison times, I admit that I wasn't a saint in life. But over the years, as I said, I got to a point where I felt like I was about to lose it. And at that time, that's when I got down on my knees and I prayed, and I got a connection with God. And I started reading the Bible, and the Bible started touching me and working through my heart. And through the Bible, it showed me that I had to let go and let God, and that I had to move on. It also showed me that I had to forgive. And I was like, well, how do I do that? So it showed me to start praying for my enemies. And I started praying. I started praying for the district attorney. I started praying for the judge. I started praying for the victim and praying blessings on their life. And one day I woke up and I just felt a peace. And I knew that that burden had been released. And therefore, from that day on, I was able to go forward. And it's just because of my Christian belief that before I ever walked out of prison, I had a peace of mind, even before I was ever set free, even before I knew I would be set free. And that was a good feeling, because before that, my years in prison were very, very, very hard. They were hard. They were frustrating. I had a lot of anger in me. I was unsociable. I didn't talk to prison guards. I remember being on a detail one time, swinging the bush axe, and I'm like, I just got tired of swinging it, and I stick the bush axe in the ground, and I just leaned on it, just leaned on it. And every time the guard, I guess I knew it would get next to him. Every time he said something to me, he said, "Johnson, get off that bush axe." Instead of me answering him, I would just look up at him and smile. Boy, he got upset. So, of course, they got a place for you. They threw me in what they called a hole. And back then, they outlawed it later on, but they had what they called a silver bullet. And the silver bullet was like, it's supposed to be kind of similar to like a meatloaf type meat, where they would bring in some aluminum foil to feed you. And it's supposed to have vitamins in it. And that was the way to try to break you, but the meat would be half raw and smelly, and you couldn't eat it, and it was just terrible. But those are some of the things that went on. But it was through my Christian conversion, and through just from reading the Bible, and just I started going to church, and they had all these volunteers that were coming into the prison, and they were giving love, and they weren't asking, "What are you in there for?" But they were just sharing love, and they were sharing their Christian belief, and they were taking the time out of their life to do this, and it touched me in a very special way, and it made me want to give something back, and it made me also realize that God is real, and that's why I have that peace that I have. That's why I harbor no bitterness. I forgive, but I don't forget. You always remember, because you learn from your experiences, and you can educate other people from your experiences. But if you hold that anger and that bitterness inside of you, it will destroy your life. It's always like somebody already has some type of pull control over your emotions and your actions and what you do. So somewhere along the line, you got to let go, and then you can say, well, now I got the victory. You have no control. My future and my destiny is now in my hand, and I can go forth from here.
Did you have the same attorney in the Fulton County case as you had in the Clayton County case trials?
He asked me did I have the same attorney in Clayton County and Fulton County. Good question. And the answer to that is no. I was disappointed in my attorney in the Clayton County case. And I don't think that he was adequately prepared. I don't think he did as good a job as what he could have. But at the same time, looking at all the odds, I don't think he would have won regardless. But at least I would have felt better if he would have done a better job than what he did. And he didn't even coach me on how to deal with the jury and how to answer questions. In the second trial in Fulton County, I had a different attorney who was excellent. He prepared himself. He had demonstrations to demonstrate. He coached me on how to deal with the district attorney, the prosecutor as they questioned me, and how to look at the jury. He said when the prosecutor walks up to you, look at them when they ask you the question, and then turn around, he said, look at the jury and give you an answer to the jury. I didn't do that during the first trial. So every time, it was so funny because every time the prosecutor would ask me a question, I would turn around and start talking to the jury. Then they would move and try to distract me or try to ask me another question to get me to look at them. But I would continue to talk to the jury. And I believe it really made a difference because they could see the sincerity. It wasn't like just a person talking, but they could look in my eyes and they could see the sincerity and the truthfulness.
Thank you for sharing your story. What are your thoughts on the American justice system now and the factors and the steps being taken to remedy factors towards wrongful convictions? And have you told your story to your daughter? And if not, how do you plan on telling her?
Okay. She asked me several questions. How do I feel about the American justice system? Have I told it to my daughter? And what else?
How do you feel about the steps being taken
to remedy toward wrongful conviction? Okay. The first question was about the American justice system. It's so funny. I get questions all the time. And I remember I was doing a radio interview. And I'm very direct and to the point. And sometimes I don't say a whole lot. And they asked me, said, how do you feel about the American justice system now, Mr. Johnson? And I said, well, you got to have laws. And they just like, what? But that's the truth. The American justice system, America is a great country. It's a great country. The system itself is basically a good system, but anything that's man-made, is subject to have flaws. So therefore, there are areas in this system that needs corrected. And the only way it's going to be corrected is by the people here in this country. The people that step up and say, hey, we need to make a change. We need to change this, or we need to correct this to make it better. And that's just like anything. As far as my daughter is concerned, she knows all about my situation. Matter of fact, she's 7 years old, and she asked me the other day, because she can read very good, could she read my book? And I told her to wait a few more years. I told her, I said, well, you wait a few more years, and I'll let you read it. But, at the same time, I feel that it helped give you a better understanding and insight into my, because she has questions all the time, to my situation. But she knows that her daddy went to jail. She knows that her daddy was also accused of something that he didn't do. So she knows all these things. She's been with me before when I've spoken at different places. So she's very perceptive. She asks a lot of questions. Very, very understanding little girl. As far as the things that my perception on what's being done, well, more could be done than what's being done. But right now, I have to applaud the Innocence Project, especially the one in New York and the ones across the United States. They're taking stands to directly, go before legislation and so forth to try to get laws changed, enacted to prevent people from being falsely convicted. We're attacking. We're trying to set guidelines throughout the United States and through each individual state for identification procedures, so misidentification won't be as erroneous, because right now 85% of people who are falsely convicted is based on misidentification procedures. We're taking guidelines to try to get preservation of evidence, because now we want to make sure that the laboratories are handling the evidence and preserving it correctly, so there won't be any errors, there won't be any mistakes, that somebody won't be able to say or misread a result. We're also, some of the things we're doing, that we're trying to get compensation laws passed throughout the different states to try to help people as far as being compensated. So there are a lot of areas that we're looking into, and we're trying to make a change. That's where a lot of people don't realize that people just hear about the Innocence Project getting people out of prison. Well, right there in Georgia, where there was no laws to preserve evidence, I helped, and the Innocence Project in Georgia, we helped go before legislation to get a law passed to get evidence preserved. And now DNA evidence has to be preserved and saved for a minimum of 10 years, and indefinitely in death penalty cases, or until the person expires or the case expires, which is something that's great, that you feel good to be a part of doing something like that. So it's making a difference. It's just a small dent in the entire structure of things, but they say, a journey of 1,000 feet or 1,000 miles, a journey of 1,000 feet begins with one step at a time. So you got to begin somewhere.
What was the hierarchy like in prison, in terms of the inmates? And that's one question. The other question is that many people who are in prison claim they're innocent. And
everybody's innocent.
Everyone's innocent, or a lot of people are. How did you cope with that? That you knew that you were innocent, but you're in this society where, this culture where people are running around and saying they're innocent, and then you see the bank robber clippings they've got or something. I mean, so how did you kind of cope with that?
Okay. Good question. He wants to know how do I deal with the hierarchy in prison, and how do I deal with the situation that, a lot of people in prison basically claim that they're innocent, okay? The hierarchy in prison, I hope I'm answering this correctly, but murderers, robbers, dope dealers, especially the big-time dope dealers, they get more respect than anybody in prison. Child molesters, rapists are looked upon as being the scum. They're down to the bottom of the totem pole. So that is another emotional factor that you have to deal with. Just the fact that, let's say, in prison they have certain jobs. I say I wanted to work as a counselor's aide with a female counselor because I have a sexual offense. I probably couldn't do it. So I feel like I'm being judged for something and accused. I'm like still being slapped in the face, even though I didn't do it. It's like they put this stigmatization on you. And it affects you. It affects you emotionally. But you just have to be strong and deal with it. As far as how do you deal with the fact that people say all prisoners say they're innocent. Well, that's not true. Actually, all prisoners don't say they're innocent. There's some guys that brag about what they done. There's some guys that say, yeah, I did it, And the scary part about it is, and these guys really, truly should not be released, some of them say, yeah, I did it, and I do it again. Or some of them will say, yeah, I did it, doggone, but next time I'm not going to leave any witnesses, stuff like that. And it's true. But the way I dealt with it personally was I didn't talk about my situation. I kept it inside, and that probably led up to the point where I felt like I was about to just boom, But I didn't talk to anybody about it because it was too sensitive and too touchy for me to talk to somebody, to sit there and say, hey, man, I didn't do it. And then oh, man, you a liar. You one of them tree jumpers. That's what they call rapists, you know. They call them tree jumpers. They say you hide up in trees and wait for people to walk by and then dive out on them, you know. So they have all kinds of terms in prison that they use, you know. So they say, yeah, you know, so, and then, you know, that could erupt into a violent confrontation just because it's sensitive. So I just basically, I didn't talk about it. I kept it inside. You know, there aren't that many secrets in prison, so people find out what you're in there for. So even though they're supposed to be confidential, but it just depends on how you carry yourself. When I got in prison, I lifted a lot of weights. I really did. I lifted a lot of weights. I got really big. I got really strong. And your reputation precedes you. Even though I'm not a violent person, I don't like to act violently. I'm basically a nice person. If somebody does something to you in prison, you got to react immediately to get your respect, or else worse things will happen to you. It's kind of like the strong prey upon the weak. And therefore, if they can take one thing from you, then they can take a little bit more, and they can take a little bit more. So the few confrontations I had in prison, I was fortunate that I came out on top, and that reputation kind of precedes you. So therefore, they started looking for a weaker victim. You know, we're not going to mess with this guy because we don't know how we're going to come out. We'll go mess with this guy over here because we know we can take advantage of him. Does that answer your question? Okay.
So I think we'll wrap up, but I have one final question. You said that earlier tonight someone asked you something you had never been asked before, and it was, as you grow older, do you feel more hopeful or more cynical? And I think we'll end on that question.
It was an excellent question. I've done a lot of speaking engagements across the country and in Georgia, and it's rare that I get caught off with a question that I've never been asked before. And the individual asked me, said, as you grow older in life, are you more hopeful or more cynical? And I had to sit there and I had to think about it for a second. I didn't answer just right off. I thought about it, and my answer was, I'm more hopeful. And the reason why I'm more hopeful is because I can see changes being made, even though there may be small changes. As I mentioned earlier about some of the work that the Innocence Project is doing in New York and in Georgia and in some of the other states, the fact that we can make a difference gives me hope for my children, gives me hope for the future. And therefore, you know, I don't like being negative. I don't like being, you know, I like being basically a positive person that has faith and believing. If I didn't have hope, if I didn't have faith, if I didn't have belief, if I didn't have any kind of belief, I would have gave up years ago. I would still be in that prison cell now. But because of the flicker of hope that I had that was inside of me, I continued to persevere and pursue a way to attain my freedom, which was later found through the technology of DNA. Thank you.
Thank you, Calvin, for sharing your story with us. And thank you, everybody, for coming out. Calvin will now sign books. We have books for sale outside, and you can carry on conversations with him outside. So thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you again.